Good morning. Today is Wednesday, December 27th, 2023. One of the tendencies against which we must always push is hergel, which means routine. Getting into a routine and taking things for granted. No matter how exceptional something is, whether good or bad, after a while, it no longer surprises us. We no longer look at it as exceptional. It becomes normalized. It becomes routinized. And this applies in every area of life. And it requires constant, frequently repeated reminders to try to avoid. In fact, the underlying theme of a large amount of Jewish law, especially the details of halacha, the details of Jewish law, is aimed at trying to help us overcome this. You could use the word mindfulness, which is applicable, to not take things for granted, to see something exceptional as exceptional, even if it happens on a regular basis. It's hard, and we have to keep trying to do that. So I think it's worthwhile to revisit some of the details, the terrible details from October 7th in Israel and after, to keep fresh in our minds the level and the type of trauma Israelis suffered on that day and are suffering. One expert in the area of trauma therapy said Israelis are not going through PTSD, post-trauma. They are in the midst of trauma today. And every moment of every day, right now, is a moment of trauma for many, many people in Israel, and also, of course, for Jews and supporters of Israel all around the world. So, I want to share with you this morning a few excerpts from a presentation that was given last week by Daniel Gordis. I have quoted him to you before. Gordis lives in Israel. He was born in the U.S. He's a writer, author, journalist. I think very highly of him. I think that he's a very thoughtful person. I follow his work carefully. He lives in Jerusalem. And what I want to share this morning is not anything to do with politics and not anything to do with military strategy, the military campaign. I want to focus on the mood in Israel today. And of course, this is through the eyes of Daniel Gordis. So let's start with the morning of Saturday, Shabbat morning, October 7th. Gordis was in shul. He's a religious person in Jerusalem. Remember, in Israel, it was Simchas Torah. It was Yom Tov as well as Shabbos. And it was early in the morning, 7:30, 8, something like that. And the people in shul started to hear lots of booms in the distance, but they could hear it. Now, that's not so unusual. Unfortunately, missiles have been aimed at Israel from all directions for many, many years. And normally, someone shoots a missile or a rocket, the Iron Dome shoots it down, and you hear it and you think, okay, all right, well. So they're booms. But there were lots of them. And it didn't seem to stop. And the people in the shul started to look to each other, what's going on here? And this is an orthodox shul. So the people there did not have their cell phones with them. and they were kind of, in a sense, cut off. Of course, that's one of the beauties of Shabbat, to be disconnected from the world. We need that. We need that every week. And he says at that time, nobody was nervous, but they were fidgety, wondering what was going on. And then, a little later, during the davening, the air raid alarm went off. Now, in Israel, the air raid alarm is something that you cannot miss. You may have experienced, it's an incredible experience. The air raid siren goes off all across Israel on Yom HaShoah, on Yom HaZikaron, Holocaust Memorial Day, Israel's Day in memory of fallen soldiers, for a moment of silence. And if you've experienced it, if you know about it, everybody hears it. I mean, wherever you are in the country, you'll hear it. Even if you're sleeping, you would hear it. And he says this, it's not funny. He says this because there were people starting on October 7th and then going on, because this now started to become more frequent over the last almost 3 months. There were people who are on prescription medications like Ambien. If you take sleeping pills, and these people were tremendously worried. What happens if we take a sleeping pill, we go to sleep, and we're in a deep sleep, we don't hear the siren, and something, God forbid, terrible could happen? And so there were people who were refusing to take their medicine. And of course, if you actually have insomnia and you're literally not sleeping for a couple of days, you're going to be even a worse wreck. So the government had to put out a statement. And they said, listen, if you're taking medicine, keep taking your medicine. We assure you, you will hear this siren. This is loud enough to overcome any medication. You have to keep taking your medicine. All right. So the air raid siren went off, and everybody in the shul took their kids, and they took the Torah, and they went into the bomb shelter, which was nearby. They were there for a while. They finished one part of the service, and they figured, okay, they went back out. 20 minutes later, there was another siren, went back in, came back out. Finally, they finished the service, they went home. Listen to these words of Gordis. I have to say that for me to go back to that place over the last number of weeks has been unbelievably painful. It feels tarnished. It feels violated, not because our synagogue service got interrupted, but because we were sitting there looking at each other and saying, what is it? What's going on? Like it's not such a big deal. And later they learned what was going on an hour's drive away was so surreal and so unimaginable and so barbaric. And every time I go back there, he says, I think about that morning. I think, I was in shul, maybe chuckling with my friends. And now we know what was happening an hour away. Women were being raped. People were being murdered. Hostages were being taken. The terrorists recorded it. He says even the Nazis had the decency to burn the evidence when the Allies started to close in on them. These people uploaded it. It was part of the attack. He says there's a 7-8-month-old baby being held hostage. What does that mean? Hopefully he's with his mother. Hopefully he's alive. What does it mean? An 8-month-old baby, 9-month-old baby as a hostage in Gaza? An 8-year-old girl who was alone? Her mother had died of an illness. She lived with her father. She was kidnapped. She's alone. A 8-year-old girl, a hostage? I'm sure you followed this in the news when she came out. her father said to her after a little time had passed, do you know how long you were being held hostage? And she said, well, I think it was about a year. Because they had no sense of time. Have no sense of time. No night, no day. It's just unimaginable. The level of trauma in Israel is beyond anything that is imaginable. And who is it that is doing this? So-called religious people, people who say Allahu Akbar, which means God is great. It's like saying Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem, and you're taking a Holocaust survivor hostage and murdering them. And then you take women and do terrible things to them and take off all their clothes and then drive around Gaza with thousands of people cheering and celebrating and recording it and uploading it. So then Gordis says something that's really very, very, it's hard to hear. You may disagree. But he says that on October 8th, October 9th, as some of the details started to come out, he says a lot of Israelis started to feel that the entire premise of what this country is about had collapsed. Because we went through the Holocaust as a people. We went through pogroms in Russia, pogrom in Hebron, 1929. And there was no IDF, there was no state. They were just Jews, and they were murdered and raped and assaulted. And we told ourselves, that's over. Oh yes, okay, there can still be bad things that happen in Israel, and they could still do some bad things to us, yes, not minimizing that, but at least that period ended. And the events of October 7th left many Israelis with the feeling, in light of this crisis, has the Jewish state done any good if we're right back where we started? Gordis writes, this is a crisis about ourselves, about the very nature of Israel. He tells a story about his son. His son, he has several children. This is one son, 33 years old, married, couple of children. So this son was a commando for 8 years. So for 8 years, he served in an elite commando unit, and his parents have no idea to this day where he was or what he did. All they knew that what he was doing and where he was dangerous because before he started, the army sent officers to their home, to the home of the parents, to say to them, we want you to understand, we want to make sure you understand how dangerous this is, without giving you any details, but how dangerous this is what your son has signed up for, because if you're not okay with it, we will somehow find a way to not let him into this unit. But that's what he wanted to do, and so that's what he did. So this son, now 33 years old, was called up on that Shabbos. Of course, the only thing that people talk about in Israel, among large segments of the population, is which of your children, I'm talking about people of a certain age, which of your children are in, which of your children are out, where are they, do you know where they are, how many children do you have in fighting now? That's what people talk about. There's not a family in this country that is not petrified. So he goes back to October 7th, that Saturday night, when his son was called up. And by Saturday night, there were all these crazy rumors like Hamas killed some 50 people, 50. They took a dozen hostages, which is crazy. That made no sense. How is it possible to kill 50 people? It's unimaginable. How could Hamas possibly have taken a dozen hostages? This is the state of Israel. We're protected by the IDF. We have the greatest intelligence of the world. It's just not possible. Of course, we know now how much worse it was. So on that Saturday night, Gordis' son gets called up. He was there for a few days. This son is also a medic. It turns out that there were many wounded people in the south, but they were also people in pieces, people who had been dismembered. He came back home on leave for a few days later. His father says to him, "So, how's it going? What's going on?" And his son says, "I can't talk about it." So his father says to him, "You mean you can't talk about it because it's like a military thing? Like before, you couldn't talk about what you're doing. This you can't talk about for military intelligence reasons?" And he says, "No, I can't talk about it." Now, his father had no idea what was going on because at that point, still none of the details of the horror had come out. And it was just last week when his son came home again for leave for a few days. And Gordis writes, it took 2 months for him to be sort of human again. And he's just a metaphor for what's happened to this country. Gordis writes, Israel understands we cannot live alongside Hamas. We can't. Because our guard will drop, they'll keep planning, they'll come back, do this again in 2 years, in 10 years. And I've quoted to you before, and they've said it publicly, that is clearly their plan. So they cannot exist. They have to be destroyed. And by the way, Israel has about 200,000 people who are displaced from their homes. About 100,000 who live along the Gaza Strip, and about 100,000 in the north. Hezbollah has been shelling from the north, and they have been displaced. I mean, just imagine. Any other country in the world, if the country on your border had attacked you, murdered, killed, I mean, how many seconds do you think Mexico or Canada would last if either of them would do something remotely like this to the United States? So then he talks briefly about the Israeli liberals. Remember, before October 7th, what we were talking about was the political crisis and the left wing versus the right wing. The liberals, the progressives that were all protesting against the government, where are they? Well, they're in the cockpits, they're in the tanks. Because Hamas killed not only Israelis, not only Jews. Hamas killed Arabs. Hamas killed Bedouins. Hamas killed Thai workers. And these are people, and you understand, a person from Thailand, it's pretty clear by their appearance that they're not Israeli, and they're holding up their passports. We're from Thailand. And Hamas just killed them. So the progressives and the left wing understand that it's their grandchildren too who can't be guaranteed a life as long as they live. Horrific though the price on the other side has already been and is likely to be. The sense is If you don't destroy them, this country is over. So it's a sober time in Israel. And, Gordis says, he and many others are deeply concerned about the suffering of people in Gaza. They talk about it all the time. But one friend of his said to him, you know what they've done to us? They've turned this into a caveman morality. It's us or them. So it's going to be us. End of discussion. Because we're in an impossible situation. If we don't obliterate them, this country won't make it. And if this country doesn't make it, where exactly are Jews safe? At Harvard? In Paris? So he writes, we see ourselves fighting for us, not only for us in Israel, but for the entire Jewish people, which the world hates just as much as it always did. And we see that. And it's a very conflicted country because we know what's happening on the other side. But at the same time, it's a very determined country. Gordis concludes by saying, I do hope that at a certain point we will see this as a time when we liberated the Palestinians from the barbarians who are just as barbaric to them as they are to us. But this country is determined to not lose in a way that would allow their children or their grandchildren to be kidnapped again. Nobody is willing to do that. I want to conclude with a short quote from Yoni Heilman. I think I mentioned him to you. I highly recommend. He's been writing a journal of an IDF soldier, diary of an IDF soldier. It's been appearing in Sapir, which is an online publication. Yoni Heilman, Heilman. Please look for it. You'll be astounded at his writing. And he wrote, I used to think never again, this phrase, we've all been saying it and hearing it all these years, never again. I used to think never again meant Jews would never again be killed for being Jewish. Would that it were so. But now I know. It means that never again will the murdering of Jews go unnoticed, unremarked, and unanswered. We do not want this conflict. And we do not want to hurt other people. But we must ensure that we are safe. I hope and pray that Hashem will assist, that these efforts will bear fruit, and that finally, at some point, both Israelis and Palestinians will be able to live in peace. Because with Hamas, that is simply not possible. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.